Imagine yourself waking up in the dead of winter, not in your warm bed with blankets and heaters, but in a medieval hut, with a roof of thatch dripping with frost, walls of mud and wattle barely holding back the icy wind. At the ground beneath you is nothing but frozen dirt, and the only thing between your body and the earth is a layer of straw that has gone damp, moldy, and stiff. Your breath fogs in the air, turning into white smoke that curls upward before vanishing. You try to move your fingers, but they are stiff from the night, and your first thought is not about dreams or plans, but survival. This was the morning of a medieval peasant in winter, and this is where our story begins. Forget cozy fireplaces and fur coats, because the life of a peasant was a brutal dance with the cold. Every step, every breath of food was a question of endurance. Could you survive what they endured? Let's find out. The hut itself was your prison and your shield. It kept out the wolves but not the frost. There was no glass window to let the sun in. Instead, just a hole stuffed with cloth or wood. The only warmth came from a small fire, but firewood was scarce. Gathering it meant trudging into the forest, where the Lord's men might accuse you of stealing if you took too much. For peasants, even fire had to be begged from the earth or stolen from the edges of nobility's forest. Sometimes they burned, peat dug from the marshes or dried dung from their animals, stacked carefully through the year for this very purpose. Imagine the bitter smoke filling the hut, your eyes watering, your lungs aching, but without it, you and your children would freeze. Food was another battle. Fresh harvest was long gone, and what remained was stores of rye, barley, onions, salted fish if you were lucky, or dried beans. Bread was dark and coarse, filled with husks that scraped the mouth, often sour with age. The poor relied on pottage, a thick stew of whatever could be found, cabbage, turnip, a handful of oats, perhaps a bit of pork fat if a neighbor had slaughtered a pig. Meat was a rarity. Winter meant scarcity, and scarcity meant hunger. Children whimpered in the night, not from nightmares, but from empty stomachs gnawing at their ribs. Mothers tried to distract them with stories, old tales whispered by the fire, so the children's minds would drift before their bellies demanded more. Now think of the clothing. You're not dressed in fine velvet or fur like the noble families in their stone castles. Instead, you wear wool scratchy, coarse, sometimes patched so many times the original cloth is gone. Undergarments of linen, if you had them, were precious. Cloaks were shared between family members, handed down from father to son until threadbare. Shoes were simple leather, stuffed with straw for insulation, but the straw grew damp from melted snow, and once wet, froze into stiff sheets around the foot. Frostbite was not uncommon, though they did not have a word for it, only blackened toes and hands that stopped working. Children wore smaller versions of their parents' clothes, often so oversized they tripped while carrying buckets of water. Warmth was a luxury, and every layer of wool or fur was a shield in the war against the cold. Outside the hut, the world was silent. Snow blanketed the fields, turning farmland into wasteland. The crops that once swayed green and gold in summer were nothing but brittle stubble poking through ice. The animals, too, fought for survival. Sheep and goats huddled together in pens, their wool thick with frost. Cows gave less milk in the cold, their bodies conserving energy, and chickens laid fewer eggs. Every peasant family prayed their animals survived, for they were wealth, food, and security. If a cow died, it wasn't just meat lost, it was milk for children, manure for fields, leather for clothing. The survival of man and beast was intertwined, and winter spared neither. And then there was illness. Cold and damp brought coughing fits, fevers, aching bones. A simple chill could turn deadly. Without modern medicine, a cough could become pneumonia. A scratch could fester, and there were no antibiotics, no hospitals, no doctors for peasants. At best, there was a village-wise woman with herbs and charms, or prayers whispered in a candle at church. Death walked close in winter. You buried your neighbors in shallow graves, the ground too frozen to dig deep. You sang for them in the frost, your breath mingling with theirs as it left the earth for good. But survival wasn't only misery, it was ingenuity. Peasants had tricks, clever ways to push back death. They lined their walls with rushes, hung cloths to block drafts, sealed gaps with mud. They dried herbs in summer to brew teas that warmed the blood. They fermented cabbage into sauerkraut, salted fish, smoked meat, brewed ale that stayed safe to drink when water turned foul. Children were tucked into bed together, bodies huddled for warmth like small embers of life. Families shared everything, because winter demanded it. Alone, a man might freeze. Together, a village endured. There was also faith. The church loomed over their lives, a stone structure that seemed eternal compared to their fragile huts. Inside, candles burned, incense warmed the air, and peasants prayed for spring. Priests preached endurance, suffering as a virtue, survival as God's will. Festivals like Christmas or Candlemas broke the monotony, offering feasts and warmth, even if only for a day. The promise of spring was written into their prayers, and yet peasants were not passive. They found ways to laugh, to sing, to dance even when the cold gnawed at their bones. Around the fire, old songs were sung. Children carved toys from wood. Fathers repaired tools. Mothers spun wool by the dim light of a rush lamp. Winter was long, but it was not silent. Life clung stubbornly, defiantly, in every smile, every song, every steaming bowl of pottage. Now, let's draw the contrast. While peasants shivered in huts, nobles lived in castles. But even there, life was not as warm as you might imagine. Castles were stone giants, built for defense, not comfort. Their halls were cavernous and drafty, fireplaces huge but inefficient, tapestries hung on the walls, not only for beauty but to block the chill. Nobles wore furs, drank mulled wine, and dined on roasted meat, yet even they huddled close to fires in winter. Servants rushed to keep braziers burning, to fetch wood, to carry blankets. Nobility fared better, yes, but the cold respected no rank. Only wealth dulled its bite. Back in the village, the struggle continued day after day. Water froze in buckets. Bread grew stale and hard. Each morning you prayed the fire hadn't died overnight. If it had, you faced the miserable task of coaxing a spark from flint with fingers stiff as wood. Families sometimes begged embers from neighbors, carrying them carefully in pots of ash to restart their own fires. Fire was life, and without it, there was only darkness and death. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable, yet also the most resilient. They played in snow, chasing each other through frost-covered fields, their laughter carrying on the cold air. They turned hardship into games, sliding on frozen ponds, building shapes from snow, carving sticks into little swords. But hunger was always near. A game could be interrupted by a growling stomach, by the sight of a thin rabbit darting through the underbrush, by the call of a mother telling them to gather wood. Childhood was fleeting, but in the cold, even laughter was an act of survival. Imagine one boy, Tomas no more than 9, rising before dawn to tend sheep. His breath hangs in the air like smoke as he pushes through snowdrifts. His feet ache with cold, but he sings softly to himself, a song his grandmother taught him, to keep fear away. He knows the wolves are hungry too. He clutches a stick, his only weapon, praying the sheep survive till spring. His story was not unique. It was the story of countless children. And then picture a widow, Anna, with 3 small children, her husband gone, taken by fever last winter. She sits by the fire, patching clothes by weak light, rationing bread. She feeds her children first, taking the smallest portion for herself. Her face is lined with exhaustion, but her eyes burn with determination. Her survival means theirs, and she carries that weight every day. These were the quiet heroes of winter, women who bore hunger, grief, and cold with unbreakable strength. Yet even in the harshest cold, the promise of spring lingered. Snow began to melt, streams thawed, green shoots pushed stubbornly through frozen soil. The peasants celebrated with May Day festivals, dancing, feasting, reminding themselves that life returned, always, even after the longest winter. But until then, survival was a test of patience, courage, and resilience. So now, I ask you, could you survive it? Could you rise before dawn to break ice for water, carry wood till your back broke, live on cabbage and rye? Could you sleep on straw beside the animals, wrapped in a single cloak, while wolves howled outside? Could you endure hunger, sickness, endless cold, and still find the strength to laugh, sing, and carry hope in your heart? Medieval peasants did. They survived, not just one winter but countless winters, across generations. Their blood carried them through, and without their endurance, history itself would not have survived. The next time you wrap yourself in a blanket, sip hot coffee, or complain about the chill in the air, remember them. Remember the smoke-filled huts, the frozen fields, the black bread and salted fish, the songs sung against the dark. Remember that survival was not comfort, but grit. And then ask yourself, in the face of such a winter, would you survive? Or would you become another forgotten name, buried beneath the snow? This was the world of the medieval peasant in winter, raw, brutal, unrelenting, yet filled with human spirit. A world where every ember mattered, every shared meal was a lifeline, and every dawn was a victory.